The moment I started walking down that aisle, I felt like my heart might burst from happiness. The soft music, the smell of flowers, and Ethan's eyes waiting for me at the end. It was everything I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. I thought my father, Richard Miller, would be proud to see his only daughter getting married. But instead, he stood up in the middle of the ceremony, his voice echoing through the church, calling me a disgrace. For a few seconds, I didn't even understand what was happening. The guests gasped, the pastor froze, and my mother's face turned pale. My father's words cut through the silence like a blade. He said I was throwing away the family name, that I was making a fool of myself by marrying someone beneath our class. I could feel my legs trembling, my bouquet shaking in my hands. Ethan took a step forward, trying to calm him down, but my father wouldn't stop. His anger filled the whole room. Then, just like that, he turned his back on me and walked out. The heavy doors closed behind him, and it felt like a part of my life shut with. The room stayed silent for what felt like forever. I could hear people whispering, some trying not to stare. My mother quietly dabbed at her tears but didn't say a word. I wanted to disappear. Ethan squeezed my hand gently, his eyes full of worry. He whispered, "It's your choice, Sarah. We can stop this right now if you want." But I shook my head. I didn't want my father's pride to destroy what I had with Ethan. So, I took a deep breath, wiped my tears, and told the pastor to continue. The rest of the ceremony went on, but it felt hollow. My smile was forced, my heart heavy. When Ethan slipped the ring on my finger, I tried to focus on him, on the love we shared, not the shame my father had thrown over us. Every click of the camera, every cheer from the guests sounded distant. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head, the look of disgust in my father's eyes, the sound of his footsteps leaving the church. After the ceremony, the reception felt awkward. People avoided talking about what happened, pretending everything was fine, but I could feel their pity. My best friend Emma tried to lighten the mood, but I could barely eat or smile. My mother came to me quietly and whispered, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You didn't deserve that." That was all she said before walking away to keep up appearances. That night, when Ethan and I finally got home, I broke down. My wedding dress was still on, but it felt like a costume hiding my heartbreak. I kept asking myself what I had done to deserve that kind of humiliation. Ethan held me close and said, "One day he'll regret this, Sarah. You'll see." At that moment, I didn't care about revenge or pride. I just wanted to understand how a father could choose his ego over his daughter's happiness. But deep down, I knew something had shattered between us forever. The reception that followed felt like walking through a storm in silence. The music played softly, but no one was really listening. Conversations turned into whispers, and every smile looked forced. Ethan stayed close to me the whole time, trying to keep me steady, but I could barely speak. I didn't even taste the food that had been planned for months. The room that was supposed to hold laughter and joy now felt heavy, cold, and full of judgmental eyes. I tried to act normal, to pretend my father's outburst hadn't ruined everything, but it was impossible. People came up to congratulate us, their smiles tight, their eyes filled with pity. I could feel their curiosity. Everyone wanted to know why a father would humiliate his daughter like that on her wedding day. My mother moved around quietly, keeping her head low. She looked more ashamed than anyone else in that room. Ethan stayed calm, his hand never leaving mine. Every now and then he whispered, "It's okay, Sarah. Don't let him take this day from you." But his words didn't reach me. My heart felt like it had been stepped on, and no amount of love could lift it back up. When it was finally time to leave, I didn't even say goodbye to most guests. I just wanted to get away from the stares, the murmurs, and the disappointment that hung in the air. Later that night, when we reached home, I sat in silence for a long time. Ethan tried to talk, but I couldn't find the words. The sound of my father's voice kept echoing in my head. "You're a disgrace." I kept asking myself why he hated Ethan so much. Ethan came from a hardworking family, honest and humble. He wasn't rich, but he was kind and loyal. How could my father not see that? A few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. She asked if she could come over. When she arrived, she looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. She sat down next to me, took my hand, and said, "Your father wasn't angry about you, Sarah. He was angry about himself." I didn't understand at first. Then she explained everything. Apparently, my father had lost a huge business deal just a week before the wedding, and it was to Ethan's family company. He felt humiliated, as if his daughter was choosing the side that had defeated him. He blamed Ethan's father for taking what he thought was his, and when I chose to marry Ethan, he saw it as betrayal. My mother said he had been furious for days, refusing to attend, until she convinced him to come. But instead of showing love, he let his pride explode in front of everyone. When she finished speaking, I just sat there stunned. So, my father's rage wasn't about me or my happiness. It was about money, ego, and control. That realization hurt even more. I had spent my whole life trying to make him proud, and in one moment, He showed me I was never more than a reflection of his reputation. That night, I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't chase his approval anymore. If being a disgrace meant choosing love over pride, then so be it. I would carry that title with my head high. Time passed slowly after the wedding. The first few months were the hardest. Every morning, I woke up hoping my father would call, maybe just to say he regretted what he did. But the phone never rang. The silence between us became a wall that grew taller with every passing day. Ethan tried to fill that emptiness with love and patience. He would make me breakfast before work, surprise me with flowers, and remind me that family isn't always about blood. But deep down, the wound my father left kept bleeding quietly inside me. We moved to Chicago a year after the wedding. It was a fresh start. We found a small apartment with big windows overlooking the lake. Ethan got promoted, and I found a job at a design firm. Life looked peaceful from the outside, but there were nights when I couldn't sleep. I'd stare at the ceiling, remembering my father's voice calling me a disgrace. No matter how many good things happened, that memory always found a way back in. Every Christmas, I sent my parents a card. I wrote the same simple message each time: Merry Christmas. Love, Sarah. But the cards always came back unopened, the envelopes marked, returned to sender. I kept them all in a small box. It was painful, but I couldn't throw them away. Part of me still believed that one day, he would open one and realize how wrong he'd been. My mother called sometimes, always when she was sure my father wasn't around. Her voice would tremble as she asked how I was doing. She told me she missed me, that she prayed for peace between us. But whenever I asked if my father ever mentioned me, she'd go quiet. After a pause, she'd say, "He's just stubborn, Sarah. His pride won't let him admit he's wrong." I could hear her crying softly before hanging up. I never blamed her. She had lived under his shadow for years, and I knew how hard it was for her to speak up. Ethan encouraged me to move on completely, but I couldn't. The pain wasn't just about losing a father. It was about losing the belief that family love was unconditional. I had grown up admiring him, wanting to make him proud. And now, I was someone he pretended didn't exist. What I didn't know at that time was that his world was slowly falling apart. My father's company, Miller Industries, was facing lawsuits and financial problems. His arrogance had made him enemies, and his refusal to adapt left him vulnerable. But I was completely unaware. To me, he was still the same powerful man who once looked down on Ethan. I didn't realize that the very pride he used to destroy me was now destroying him too. Years passed like that, quietly, painfully, and without closure. On the surface, my life looked happy. But there was always a part of me waiting for one phone call, one letter, one moment where my father would finally see me not as a disgrace, but as his daughter. It never came, and with every passing year, the silence between us became heavier than any words could ever be. It was an ordinary afternoon when everything changed. I was cooking dinner when Ethan walked in, looking thoughtful and a little tense. He kissed me on the forehead, sat down at the table, and said he had some big news from work. I smiled, thinking maybe he got another promotion. But when he mentioned the name of the company his firm was planning to acquire, my hands froze in the middle of stirring the pot. Miller Industries, he said. The sound of it made my stomach twist. That was my father's company. For a moment, I didn't say anything. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Ethan noticed the change in my face and quickly added, "It's not final yet, Sarah. It's just in discussion." But that didn't make it easier to hear. My father's company, the same empire he once boasted about, was now failing so badly that it was being considered for acquisition. I didn't know whether to feel shocked, sad, or vindicated. I sat down slowly and tried to process what Ethan was saying. He explained that Miller Industries had been losing clients for years, and several poor decisions had pushed it toward bankruptcy. His company saw potential in buying it and restructuring the brand. I could tell from his tone that he was nervous about telling me. "I can talk to my boss," he said quietly. "We can stay out of it if you want." I looked at him for a long moment before shaking my head. "No, Ethan, you don't need to do that." My voice was calm, but inside I felt a storm. "We're not doing anything wrong. We're just doing what he taught me, survive." I thought about my father and how proud he had always been of his success. He used to tell me that the world belonged to those who could outlast others. And now his own arrogance had led him here. It felt strange. I didn't want revenge, but I couldn't ignore the strange twist of fate. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the years of silence, the unopened cards, the humiliation at my wedding. I wondered if he knew how much damage he had caused with his pride. Maybe this was life's way of showing him the cost of burning bridges. I didn't want to see him ruined, but I couldn't deny the truth either. He had created his own downfall. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's company moved forward with the acquisition talks. Every update he brought home made the reality more real. My father's business was collapsing, and soon it would be under Ethan's control. It was like watching a storm from a distance, terrifying, but impossible to look away from. Part of me wanted to call my mother, to ask how things were at home, but I didn't. I knew she would try to protect him even now. So I stayed quiet, waiting for the moment when fate would finish what pride had started. Deep down, I knew this was going to bring our paths together again. But this time, I wouldn't be the one standing in shame. The weeks that followed were tense and strangely quiet. Ethan's company moved forward with the acquisition plan, and I stayed in the background, pretending to be calm while my heart battled with mixed emotions. Every time Ethan mentioned Miller Industries, I felt a sting of memories, my father's cold stare, his voice calling me a disgrace, the years of silence that followed. It was surreal to think that the man who once acted untouchable was now losing everything. Ethan tried to keep the business side separate from our personal life, but I could see the weight it carried on him. He respected my pain, but also knew he had a job to do. "Sarah," he said one evening, "the company's in worse shape than anyone thought. Your father made some bad calls, too many loans, risky deals, and a few legal problems." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just an emptiness that words couldn't fill. As the talks continued, the truth about my father's downfall became clearer. The once powerful Miller Industries was drowning in debt. Lawsuits were piling up from former partners and employees who had been mistreated. His board of directors had lost faith in him. The man who once thought he controlled everything was now surrounded by people waiting for him to fail. Then, one afternoon, Ethan came home looking uneasy. He said, "Your father knows who's behind the acquisition." My heart skipped a beat. I could almost picture the look on his face when he heard Ethan's name, and then mine. Ethan said that Richard had tried to stop the deal once he found out. He had made angry calls, sent lawyers, even tried to delay the paperwork. But it was too late. The contracts had already been finalized. The company was legally absorbed. There was no going back. For the first time in my life, my father was powerless. The empire he had built with pride and ego was gone, swallowed by the same world he once ruled over. Ethan's company kept things professional, handling everything with fairness and respect, but I knew the truth cut deep for him. I didn't celebrate or gloat. I just sat by the window that night, staring at the city lights, wondering if he was sitting somewhere doing the same, realizing that his pride had finally cost him everything. I imagined him alone in that big office, surrounded by empty chairs and fading memories of power. It wasn't revenge that I felt. It was closure slowly forming in the distance. For years, he had made me believe I was small, unworthy, and wrong. But life had its way of revealing who truly stood tall when everything else fell apart. My father had lost his company, his respect, and his control. I had lost a father long ago, but now I realized he had finally lost himself. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the disgrace he called me. I felt like someone who had survived what his pride could not. When Ethan told me that my father wanted to see me, I wasn't sure how to feel. It had been years since I had last heard his voice or seen his face. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to leave the past buried where it belonged. But another part of me needed to see him, not for closure, but to face the man who had broken me and then destroyed himself. After a few days of thinking, I finally agreed. We met at a small cafe on the edge of the city. It was quiet, almost empty. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. For a moment, I froze. The man sitting there didn't look like my father. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale, his hair more gray than I remembered. The confident, powerful man who once commanded every room now looked like someone who had been defeated by life. He looked up when he saw me and tried to stand, but his movements were slow. "Sarah," he said softly. My name sounded strange coming from him after all those years. I sat down across from him, my heart beating fast, but my face calm. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with everything we had never said. Finally, he broke it. His voice was low, but filled with bitterness. "You did this to me." I blinked, not sure I heard him right. "All of it," he continued. "My company, my reputation, my life. You took it away from me." I stared at him, feeling the old anger rise, but I kept my voice steady. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself. I just stopped trying to save you." He looked at me as if I had slapped him. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then his eyes filled with tears, but he quickly wiped them away like he was still trying to protect his pride. I felt no joy in seeing him like that, just a deep, tired sadness. He started to talk about how everyone had betrayed him, how no one had stood by his side. I listened, but it was clear he hadn't learned much. His words were still full of blame, never reflection. I realized then that the man sitting across from me wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was looking for someone else to carry his guilt. When I stood up to leave, he looked at me with pleading eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice shaking, "you're still my daughter." I paused, looking down at him. "I know," I replied softly, "and that's why I wish you peace. But I can't carry your pain anymore." I walked out of that cafe feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, the weight of his disappointment no longer followed me. I had faced the man who once defined me, and I walked away on my own terms. I didn't need his approval, his apology, or his love to feel whole. I finally felt free, free from his shadow, free from his pride, and free from the past that once controlled me. A few weeks after I met my father, life settled back into its quiet rhythm. I was finally starting to feel at peace, focusing on work and home, when one morning I got a phone call that shattered me all over again. It was from a family friend. Her voice was trembling as she said, "Sarah, it's your mother. She passed away last night." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the world had stopped moving. My mother, Grace, had always been the quiet bridge between my father and me, the only one who still tried to keep our family together. Even after all the distance and silence, I always believed I'd have more time with her. But now she was gone. The funeral was small and somber. I stood by her casket, numb, barely hearing the prayers being said. Then I saw him, my father. He looked even smaller than the last time I'd seen him. He stood alone in the corner, his head bowed, his hands shaking slightly. For once, there was no pride in his eyes, just grief. When it was over, people slowly left until only the two of us remained. We didn't speak. There were no words that could fill that silence. He walked over and tried to say something, but his voice broke. I turned away before tears could fall. A few days later, as I was helping to sort through my mother's belongings at her house, I found a small sealed envelope tucked inside her Bible. My name and my father's were written on it in her soft handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter inside was simple, but every word carried weight. She wrote about how she had watched her family fall apart and how powerless she had felt to stop it. She said she had spent years blaming herself for staying quiet, for letting my father's pride destroy the bond we once had. She wrote that she had always believed love could fix things, but now she knew that forgiveness had to come first. Toward the end, her words grew shaky, but clear enough to break my heart. "Sarah, your father's pride is only his way of hiding pain. And Richard, your silence has cost you the love of your daughter. Please, before it's too late, forgive each other. Don't let my memory become another reason to stay apart." I read those words over and over, tears blurring the ink. For a long time, I just sat there, holding that letter to my chest, feeling both love and regret. Later, I gave a copy of it to my father. He read it quietly, his lips trembling, his eyes filled with the same pain I felt. But neither of us said anything. That letter stayed with me. It wasn't just my mother's final wish. It was a reminder that sometimes love gets buried under pride and hurt until it's too late to dig it out again. She had seen the truth long before either of us did, and her words were the only thing strong enough to reach the parts of us we'd both kept locked away. A few weeks after my mother's funeral, I couldn't stop thinking about her letter. Her words kept replaying in my head, especially the part where she begged us to forgive each other. I knew I had already let go of most of my anger, but I had never truly faced what forgiveness meant. One afternoon, without telling anyone, I decided to drive back to my childhood home, the old Miller estate. It had been years since I'd been there. The drive felt long and heavy. As I turned down the familiar road lined with bare trees, my heart started to ache. When I pulled up in front of the house, it didn't look like the place I remembered. The garden was overgrown, the windows dusty, and the grand front door that once seemed so intimidating was now faded and worn. Everything about the house reflected the man who lived inside, someone holding on to a past that was already gone. When my father opened the door, he looked even older than before. His clothes hung loosely on him, and his eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept properly in months. He didn't seem surprised to see me, just quietly stepped aside and said, "Come in." I walked in and saw what was left of his world: empty rooms, boxes of old business files, and photographs of better days. The silence in that house was suffocating. He made us tea, though neither of us really touched it. For a while, we just sat there, the ticking clock filling the space between us. I could tell he wanted to speak, but he didn't know how. Finally, I said what I had come to say. "Dad, I came here because I don't want to carry this anymore." He looked up slowly, his expression blank, but his eyes searching mine. "I forgive you," I continued quietly, "but that doesn't mean I can forget everything. You called me a disgrace in front of the people I loved. You turned your back when I needed you the most. Those things will always be part of me." My voice shook, but I didn't look away. This isn't about revenge, and it's not about winning. It's about peace, the kind that doesn't depend on you anymore. He didn't answer right away. His hands trembled as he picked up his cup. "I never meant for things to go this far," he said weakly. "I thought I was protecting what mattered." I gave a small, sad smile. "You were protecting your pride, not your family." For a long time, neither of us spoke again. There was no big apology, no tears, no dramatic moment. Just two people sitting together after years of silence. knowing that time had taken away any chance to start over. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door. "Sarah," he said softly, "thank you for coming." I nodded but didn't look back. As I stepped outside, I felt something lift off my chest. It wasn't joy and it wasn't sadness, it was release. That visit wasn't about rebuilding what was lost. It was about letting go. My mother's wish had come true in her own way. We had faced each other, not as enemies, but as two broken people finally admitting that the past couldn't be changed. And as I drove away, I realized I didn't need his love anymore to feel whole. Forgiving him was the only closure I ever needed. 6 months after that visit, Sarah received a phone call early in the morning. It was from her father's lawyer. His voice was calm but heavy, and before he even said the words, she somehow knew. Richard had passed away quietly in his sleep. There was no drama, no struggle, no last-minute plea. Just silence, the kind that follows a life finally letting go. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, holding her phone, staring at nothing for a long time. She didn't cry. There were no tears left for the man who had once made her feel small, nor any hatred for what he had done. What she felt was something deeper, peace mixed with a faint sadness, like saying goodbye to a version of herself that had waited too long for his love. A week later, she attended his small funeral. There weren't many people there. Most of his old business partners had disappeared when his company fell apart, and a few distant relatives came out of duty rather than affection. Sarah stood quietly near the back, watching the casket being lowered into the ground. The man who had once commanded rooms now rested in silence, surrounded by nothing but wilted flowers and fading memory. After the ceremony, the lawyer handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter written in her father's uneven handwriting. It was short, just a single page. "Sarah," it began, "I spent years believing that strength came from pride, that love meant control, and that success would last forever. I was wrong. You were right to walk away. You became everything I wanted to be, brave, kind, and free from the shadows that consumed me. I hope you can remember me not for my mistakes, but for trying to understand them too late." Sarah read the letter twice before folding it carefully and slipping it back into the envelope. There was a strange calm in her chest, not joy, not grief, just acceptance. For the first time, she realized that forgiveness wasn't something you gave once. It was something you had to choose every day, even when the person was no longer there to hear it. A few weeks later, she was told that her father had left her the family home. She drove there one last time, standing at the front gate, looking at the grand house that had once felt like a cage. The air was still, and the windows reflected the same sunlight she used to watch as a little girl. She walked through each room quietly, touching the walls, remembering laughter that had turned into arguments, and dreams that had been replaced by expectations. But when she left, she didn't take anything with her. The house, the wealth, the memories, they belonged to another life. She locked the door, handed the keys to the lawyer, and walked away for good. Some wounds never truly disappear. They fade, they soften, but they stay as gentle scars, reminders of where you've been and how far you've come. Sarah didn't need her father's approval anymore. She had already built a life of her own, one grounded in peace, not pride. And as she stood under the open sky, she whispered quietly, "Goodbye, Dad." It wasn't a goodbye to him alone. It was a goodbye to everything that had once held her back. Years passed, and life slowly settled into something calm and beautiful. The pain that had once shaped Sarah's every thought had softened into distant memories. She and Ethan built a steady, happy life in Chicago, one built on trust, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving heartbreak. Their daughter, Emily, grew up surrounded by the love and understanding Sarah once wished she'd had. On a warm afternoon, Sarah and Ethan sat among a crowd of proud parents, watching Emily walk across the stage to receive her college diploma. The sunlight touched her hair the same way it once did Sarah's on her wedding day. But this time, there was no shame, no fear, no harsh words waiting to break her spirit. Only pride, the kind that came from love, not control. As the applause echoed, Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Ethan reached for her hand, and she smiled through the tears that finally came, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. "She's the same age I was when everything fell apart," Sarah whispered softly. "But look at her, she's standing strong, unbroken." Ethan smiled back. "That's because she learned from you." Sarah watched Emily hug her friends, full of life and confidence, and for a moment, she saw her younger self, the girl who once walked down an aisle with hope in her heart, only to have it crushed by the man who should have protected her. But that girl had grown. She had learned that healing wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about proving to yourself that you could rise again. When they got home that night, Sarah walked into her small garden. The evening light made everything golden. She looked up at the sky, thinking about her father. There was no anger left, only a quiet understanding. Maybe in some way he was proud of her now. Not for her success or strength, but for her peace. She whispered softly, "You were wrong, Dad. I wasn't a disgrace. I was just learning to be free." Ethan came outside, wrapping his arms around her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just life," she said with a gentle smile. "I finally understand what it means to build something that lasts. It's not about money or names. It's about love, honesty, and having the courage to start over." He kissed her forehead, and together they watched the sunset, a quiet ending to years of pain, forgiveness, and growth. Sarah didn't win through revenge. She won through peace. She had taken the ashes of her father's pride and built something far stronger, a family rooted in love, not judgment. And as she stood there, watching her daughter's laughter drift through the evening air, she finally felt whole. The story of a broken wedding had ended in something far more powerful, a life rebuilt with grace. Sarah Miller was never a disgrace. She was proof that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well and never letting the past define who you become.